Hey, before anything else, before the story, before the history, before any of that, I want to know where in the world you are watching this right now. Drop your city, drop your country, right down there in the comments. I actually read them, every single one. There is something about knowing that someone in Lagos is watching at the same time as someone in Karachi, or someone in Toronto, or somewhere out in the middle of nowhere with one bar of signal and a lot of questions. It makes this feel real. Because this story, it needs to feel real. And real quick, what time is it where you are right now? Like literally, what time are you watching this? Morning coffee? 3 in the afternoon. Can't sleep at 2 in the morning. Drop it in the comments. Just your time, I want to know. Today's goal is 10 likes. That's it. Not 1,000, not 1,000,000. 10. If 10 people who watch this feel something, think something, question something, that is enough. That is what pushes me to keep going deeper on these stories. So if you're in, hit that like button at any point. You don't have to wait. And if you are new here and you like mysteries that are rooted in actual documented history, actual accounts from real soldiers, real operations, real terrain, hit subscribe. We do not do campfire stories on this channel. We do evidence. All right, let me tell you what happened in Kandahar in 2002. It is 2002, the Kandahar province of Afghanistan. Spring, but nobody who was there would call it spring. The temperature at altitude drops below freezing before midnight, and the wind comes off the mountains like something with intention. The unit moving through that valley, they had been operational for weeks without a proper rotation. Sleep-deprived. Alert. The kind of alert that goes past adrenaline into something quieter and more dangerous. They were not looking for something unusual that morning. They were following a trail, a legitimate military objective. Cave systems used for storage, supply lines that ran through a section of terrain so remote that even local shepherds had stopped using it years before the war began. And then the patrol stopped. Not because of enemy contact, not because of an IED, not because of anything in their training or their briefings or their entire operational history prepared them for. They stopped because something was already there. Something that, by every account that was ever recorded, should not have existed. So what did they actually see? To understand what these men encountered, you need to understand exactly where they were and what kind of war they were fighting. It is the spring of 2002. The United States military has been operating in Afghanistan since October of the previous year. The initial phase of combat operations, what the Pentagon designated Operation Enduring Freedom, has moved from the major population centers into the mountains, specifically into the eastern and southern provinces where the terrain itself becomes the enemy. Kandahar province sits in the south. It was and remains one of the most operationally complex environments on Earth. The elevation ranges from roughly 3,000 feet in the desert lowlands to over 10,000 feet in the mountain corridors near the Pakistani border. The Arghandab River Valley runs through part of it, but the area relevant to this account that was further east, higher, drier, a region of the province that military maps labeled in the most bureaucratic language possible, and that the soldiers who operated there simply called the high ground. The unit involved in this incident is a matter of documented record, though the specific names and identifications of the personnel remain protected under standard special operations protocols. What is confirmed through multiple independent reporting channels that emerged over the following decade is that the patrol was composed of United States Special Forces soldiers operating as part of a larger counterinsurgency sweep in the weeks following Operation Anaconda, one of the largest conventional military engagements of the entire Afghan campaign, which concluded in mid-March of 2002. These were not inexperienced soldiers. These were not men prone to panic or confusion. Special Forces selection filters for exactly the kind of psychological stability that prevents misidentification under stress. That matters. That matters enormously for what comes next. The terrain they were moving through on the morning in question was a natural cave complex. The kind of formation that runs through the limestone of that region like a hidden nervous system. The Afghan landscape is threaded with them. Some are natural, some were expanded over decades, some by the Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s, some more recently. The patrol's objective was reconnaissance and clearance, standard operating procedure for that phase of the campaign. They had no reason to expect anything other than what the mission briefing told them to expect. But it was not the enemy that these soldiers feared most that morning in the mountains above Kandahar. His name was not released publicly. It still has not been. What we know, what has been corroborated through multiple independent accounts, through investigative reporting, and through the testimony of others who were present or were debriefed afterward, is this: he was a staff sergeant. He had served multiple combat rotations. He was, by every professional assessment available, a composed and highly functional soldier. The kind of man who, in the language of his unit, did not rattle. The kind of man whose reports, when he filed them, were precise, measured, clinical. He was on point that morning, meaning he was the forward-most soldier in the patrol, the first set of eyes into any new terrain. That is not a position given to soldiers who struggle under pressure. The time was approximately 04:30, pre-dawn. The sky above the ridgeline was the specific shade of dark blue that exists only in those 15 minutes before the mountains start to separate themselves from the sky. The patrol was moving single file through a narrow passage between two rock faces, the kind of natural corridor that funnels both air and sound in ways that can disorient even experienced operators. He stopped. Not a tactical stop, not a hand signal for the unit to hold position and scan. He stopped the way a person stops when something in the body registers a threat before the mind has had time to name it. That animal stillness that bypasses training entirely. What he saw, and what he described afterward to the personnel who debriefed him, and what others in that patrol corroborated independently, without being shown each other's accounts first, was a figure, standing in the mouth of one of the cave openings approximately 30 to 40 meters ahead. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand the context of that distance in that light. 30 to 40 meters in pre-dawn conditions, at altitude, in terrain where shadows behave differently, because the rock faces catch and hold darkness. That is not a comfortable distance. That is close. That is well within the range where a trained soldier's visual identification is considered reliable under standard engagement protocols. He identified it as a figure because it was upright, standing on two legs, because it had the general silhouette of something bipedal, and because it was looking at them. What it did not look like was a man. The accounts vary slightly on the details, as genuine eyewitness accounts always do. Memory under extreme stress is not a photograph, it is a reconstruction. But the points of agreement across every version of this account are consistent enough that the differences only reinforce the credibility of the core description. The figure was large, not large the way a tall man is large in a way that recalibrated every spatial reference in that corridor. Estimates placed its height at somewhere between 12 and 15 feet. Its build was not lean. It was broad, proportioned in the way a human body is proportioned, but scaled in a way that made the soldiers around the staff sergeant instinctively take a step back. Not a trained tactical retreat, a step back, the kind the body performs before the mind gives permission. It had hair, red hair, long, matted, covering most of its body. Its face in the low pre-dawn light was directed toward the patrol. One account described the eyes as pale. Another described them simply as wrong, not in color, in placement, in the quality of attention behind them. It was carrying something, a spear or something functionally similar, a long shaft, primitive in construction but held with what multiple accounts described as deliberate intention. It did not run, it did not retreat into the cave, it did not make a sound. It stood there, and it looked at them. And for a period of time that nobody in that patrol could agree on afterward. Some said 10 seconds, some said closer to a minute. Nothing happened. And then it charged. The patrol opened fire. The engagement was close. The figure was hit. Multiple accounts confirm this. It went down. And the patrol did what trained soldiers do when a threat goes down at close range in unknown terrain. They advanced. What happened in the moments immediately after that advance is where the account becomes something that no military report has ever fully explained. And it is where this story stops being a strange encounter and becomes something considerably harder to dismiss. Pause for 1 second, because I need to know where you are on this right now. Drop it in the comments. What do you think that patrol encountered? Was it a psychological response to extreme stress and sleep deprivation? Was it an animal, something large, something undocumented? Or was it something that does not have a name in any field manual? No wrong answers. I want to see what you think before you hear the rest. Let's see what the records actually say. It is 0432. The corridor is maybe 8 feet wide at its narrowest point. Rock on both sides. Cold that has been sitting in that stone all night, radiating outward now. The kind of cold that gets through body armor and finds the skin underneath. The staff sergeant on point has stopped moving. The soldiers behind him stop too. Not because of a hand signal, because of something in the way he has gone still. There is a stillness that trained soldiers recognize in each other. It is not the stillness of waiting. It is the stillness of something the body does before the mind has caught up. He is looking at the cave mouth ahead. 32 meters, possibly 35. The pre-dawn light is the color of nothing. That specific blue-black that exists only in this window of time, at this altitude in terrain where the sky and the ridgeline are still one continuous dark shape. And in the mouth of that cave, something is standing. It is upright. It is occupying vertical space in a way that does not match the rock behind it or the cave entrance around it. Its shoulders, if that is the right word for what it has, are above the top of the cave mouth, which means it is either partially outside the entrance, or the cave entrance is larger than it appears in the darkness, or it is simply that tall. The soldier directly behind the staff sergeant later described what happened inside his own body in the next few seconds. He said his hands tightened on his rifle without him deciding to tighten them. He said his breathing shortened, not because he was afraid, he was careful to say. He had been afraid before. He knew what fear felt like. This was different. This was the body performing a calculation that the mind had not yet been asked to perform. The figure does not move. It is not pressed against the rock. It is not attempting to conceal itself. It is standing in the mouth of that cave the way something stands when it has never needed to hide from anything. When the concept of concealment has simply never been a relevant consideration. That detail, that specific quality of its posture, that is the detail that comes up again and again across every account. Not the size, not the hair, not the eyes, the posture. The absolute absence of the instinct to make itself smaller. It is holding something in its right hand, a shaft, long, roughly hewn from what appears to be wood though. At this distance and in this light, that identification is uncertain. It is holding it the way something holds a tool it was made to carry. Naturally, without thought. The way a soldier carries a rifle after enough years that the weight of it becomes invisible. The staff sergeant has still not moved. Nobody in the patrol has moved. The thing in the cave entrance is looking at them. There is no question about this. The angle of its head, the direction of its face, everything in its body language. And yes, it has body language. That is one of the most deeply unsettling aspects of every account, that it communicates with its posture the way a person communicates with their posture. All of it is oriented directly at the patrol. It knows they are there. It has possibly known they were there before they knew it was there. And then it moves, not slowly, not with any of the deliberation of its stillness. It comes out of that cave entrance the way something comes out of a space it has exited 1,000 times, and it covers the ground between itself and the patrol with a speed that every account describes the same way. Too fast. Not fast the way an animal is fast. Fast the way something is fast when its stride length simply does not correspond to any scale of movement the human eye has been calibrated to track. Each step is covering distance that a step should not cover. The arithmetic of its movement is wrong. The patrol opens fire, multiple weapons, simultaneously. The sound in that corridor is total. Rock walls on both sides mean the sound has nowhere to go but back into the bodies of the men producing it. One soldier described the noise as something he felt in his sternum more than heard with his ears. The fic takes the rounds. It does not stop immediately. This is confirmed across every account. It does not drop the way a human body drops when it absorbs that volume of fire at that range. It continues forward. 3 more steps, maybe 4, and then it goes down. The corridor goes silent. Dust, the smell of discharged weapons, the sound of breathing. 12 men standing in 8 feet of space, every one of them processing what just happened, and none of them, in that moment, willing to be the first to say what it was. They advance to the body. What they find at that distance, in the growing light of a dawn that is only now beginning to separate the sky from the mountains, is where this account enters territory that the United States military has never officially confirmed and never officially denied. The body was described as being between 12 and 15 feet in length when horizontal. Its hair was red and long and matted. Its hands, and multiple soldiers made note of this specifically, had 6 fingers, not 5, 6. And the smell of it, at close range, was something that none of the accounts has ever found an adequate word for. One soldier simply wrote, in his personal notes years later, that it smelled ancient, not decayed, not animal, ancient. A helicopter extraction was called. The body was removed from the site. The soldiers were separated, debriefed individually, and then told, in terms that left no room for interpretation, that what they had encountered was to be categorized as a large feral human, a primitive, an isolated individual living in the cave system. Most of them accepted that explanation for about as long as it took to think about it clearly, because a large feral human does not stand 12 to 15 feet tall. A large feral human does not absorb that volume of fire and keep moving. And a large feral human does not have 6 fingers on each hand. The official explanation existed. The official explanation was filed. And then, quietly, it was never referenced again. Here is what makes this more than one man's account. Here is what turns a strange morning in a mountain corridor into something that demands a serious explanation. The 2002 patrol was not the first time something matching this description was reported in the mountain terrain of Afghanistan and the surrounding region. Not even close. The first corroborating thread comes from the Soviet-Afghan War, 1979 through 1989. A decade of combat operations in the same mountain systems, the same cave networks, the same high-altitude terrain. Soviet military archives, portions of which were declassified following the dissolution of the USSR, and have been examined by researchers at institutions including the Harvard Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, contain field reports from multiple units operating in the eastern provinces of Afghanistan that describe encounters with what the reporting officers logged, in translation, as an unknown large humanoid. The reports are scattered across different years, different units, and different geographic coordinates. But the coordinates cluster. They concentrate in the eastern mountain corridor, in the same general elevation band, in terrain that, on a topographic map, overlaps almost exactly with the area of the 2002 incident. One Soviet report, filed by a unit of the 40th Army operating near the Kunar province in 1984, described an encounter during a night reconnaissance patrol in which two soldiers reported a bipedal figure of extraordinary height observing their position from a ridge line above them. The report was flagged by the commanding officer, not for investigation, but for psychiatric evaluation of the soldiers involved. Both soldiers were cleared. Both were returned to active duty. The report was filed and, as far as available records indicate, never followed up. That detail matters, the psychiatric evaluation, because it tells you something about how institutions handle accounts they cannot categorize. They do not investigate. They check whether the witness is reliable. And when the witness is reliable, they file it and move on. The second corroborating thread is older, much older. The Pashtun tribal oral traditions of the Afghan-Pakistani border region contain consistent references to a creature they call the Barmanu. The descriptions in ethnographic records compiled by researchers from the University of Peshawar and cross-referenced in the regional folklore archives of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Cultural Authority describe a large, hair-covered bipedal entity associated specifically with high-altitude cave systems in the mountain ranges along the border. The Barmanu accounts predate any Western military presence in the region by centuries. They appear in accounts collected from village elders as far back as the 1880s during the British survey of the northwest frontier. Red hair, cave dwelling, extraordinary size. A temperament described as territorial rather than predatory. It does not hunt humans, but it responds with violence when it perceives an intrusion into its space. Those three characteristics. In accounts that were recorded before any of the soldiers in the 2002 patrol were born. The third thread is the one that received the most attention in the years following the Kandahar incident, as accounts began to surface through veteran communities and independent journalists. In 2004, a former member of a separate Special Forces unit who had operated in a different province of Afghanistan gave an account to a researcher documenting anomalous military encounters. His account was taken independently, without access to the 2002 accounts. He described a patrol operating near cave systems in the Nuristan province, northeast of Kandahar. Different terrain, different year, different unit, that had reported something large and bipedal in the cave networks. His patrol had not engaged it, they had heard it. Movement in a section of cave system that their night vision equipment could not penetrate. Breathing, or something that sounded like breathing, scaled in a way that did not correspond to any animal his unit could identify. They marked the coordinates. They withdrew. The coordinates were included in their debrief. What happened to those coordinates in the official record has not been established. A fourth account, this one from a journalist embedded with coalition forces in Helmand province in 2007, describes a conversation with a local elder who had lived in the region his entire life. The elder, speaking through an interpreter, said that the mountains had always had something in them, that this was known, that it was the reason certain valley approaches had been avoided by local communities for generations. Not because of bandits, not because of terrain, because of what lived higher up. He was not surprised, the elder said, that foreign soldiers had encountered it. He was surprised it had taken them this long. So, what are we actually dealing with here? I want to give you 4 frameworks, 4 ways of looking at this, because the honest answer is that none of them fully closes the question. And I think you deserve to hear all 4 before you decide where you land. The first explanation is psychological. Combat-induced perceptual distortion is a documented, clinically studied phenomenon. Extreme sleep deprivation, and the soldiers in this patrol had been operational for weeks, produces measurable effects on visual processing, threat identification, and size estimation. Dr. Matthew Friedman of the National Center for PTSD has written extensively on the way that prolonged combat exposure reshapes how the brain processes ambiguous stimuli. The brain under that kind of sustained stress is actively looking for threats. It will construct a threat from incomplete information faster than it will construct a neutral interpretation. This is not weakness. This is the survival mechanism doing exactly what it evolved to do. That explanation accounts for some of what happened. It does not account for the fact that multiple soldiers, debriefed separately, without being shown each other's accounts, described the same specific physical details independently. Perceptual distortion is individual. Shared specific hallucination, down to the details of 6 fingers, does not have a documented clinical precedent. The second explanation is wildlife. The mountain systems of the Afghan-Pakistani border region contain ecosystems that remain, to this day, incompletely surveyed. The disruption of decades of consecutive armed conflict has effectively created wildlife refuges in the high-altitude zones, areas of terrain that no scientific survey team has safely accessed in living memory. Bears, large primates displaced northward, a subspecies not recorded in available zoological literature. These are not impossible propositions. What this explanation cannot account for is the upright posture maintained across the full duration of the encounter. Bears rear up. They do not charge on 2 legs across 30 meters of open ground while absorbing rifle fire. And no known great ape species exists within thousands of miles of this terrain. The wildlife explanation requires us to propose the existence of an animal that has left no physical evidence in any scientific record. In a region where scientific access has been limited enough that absence of evidence is genuinely not the same as evidence of absence. The third explanation is enemy psychological operations. The history of warfare is dense with examples of deliberate deception designed to exploit fear. During the Vietnam conflict, American forces documented instances of the North Vietnamese Army using sound equipment and theatrical staging to create the impression of supernatural entities in jungle terrain. The Taliban and affiliated groups operating in Afghanistan in the early 2000s were sophisticated in their use of psychological pressure against coalition forces. This explanation requires a costume or device capable of producing a figure 12 to 15 feet tall that can move at speed, absorb rifle fire, and leave a physical body at the scene. It requires that body to then be removed by helicopter by the United States military and classified. The logistics of this explanation collapse under the weight of their own requirements. The fourth explanation, and I want you to hear this one carefully. The Pashtun oral tradition has documented this entity in this specific terrain for centuries. Not as myth, not as metaphor, as a factual account of something that lives in the high caves and responds to human intrusion with territorial aggression. If that tradition is treated the way we treat any other body of indigenous environmental knowledge, which is to say, as accumulated observational data gathered by people who have lived in proximity to a specific ecosystem for generations, then what the soldiers encountered in 2002 was not a new discovery. It was a confirmation, something that was always there, long before the war, long before any army entered those mountains, something that the local communities had simply learned to root around because they had the benefit of knowing it existed. None of these explanations fully accounts for what multiple trained soldiers, men who had faced direct enemy contact and had absolutely no incentive to invent or embellish, said they encountered in that corridor above Kandahar. None of them. Not one. Stay with me. I need you to stay with me right now, because what I am about to tell you in the next few minutes, it is the account that was only surfaced through a Freedom of Information request, filed in 2014. It sat in a holding category for nearly a decade before any portion of it was released. And when it was released with sections removed. Pages that the responding agency described only as outside the scope of this request. This is the account of the commanding officer, not one of the soldiers in the corridor, the officer who received the debrief, who filed the initial report, who was in the helicopter that went back into that mountain zone the following morning. If you have made it this far, genuinely, thank you. Hit that like button right now if this story has you thinking. It takes 1 second and it means everything for this channel. Now, let me tell you what the officer wrote. The officer's account exists in two forms. There is the official debrief summary, filed through standard channels, which describes the incident in language so carefully neutral that it communicates almost nothing. Quote, unverified contact with an unknown indigenous individual, end quote. 4 words chosen not to describe what happened, but to create a category that the system already knew how to process and then set aside. And then there is the other document. The officer kept a personal field journal. His journal was not recovered by any official process. It surfaced through his family, years after his death, when his daughter, organizing his personal effects, found it among items he had specifically requested not be discarded. She contacted a researcher who had been documenting anomalous military encounter accounts for over a decade. She did not know what the journal contained. She simply knew her father had never spoken about one particular deployment. In 20 years of post-service life, through hundreds of conversations about his time in Afghanistan, he had never once mentioned 2002, and she had always known better than to ask. The journal entry for the morning after the patrol engagement is dated and located. It is written in the compressed, precise shorthand of a man who spent years reducing experience to essential notation. Most of the entry covers logistics, weather, equipment status, personnel notes, and then near the bottom of the page, the handwriting changes. Not dramatically, not the handwriting of a person in distress, the handwriting of a person who is choosing to write something they have not yet decided how to describe. The letters are slightly larger, slightly more deliberate, as if each one is being placed rather than written. He wrote, identifying information removed at the family's request. He wrote, went back in at 0600. Body was gone, not moved. gone. No drag marks, no blood trail beyond the initial contact point, no evidence of the body having been removed by any means I can account for. The site was otherwise undisturbed, whatever it was. It was not alone. I do not know how I know that. I know it the way you know when a room has just been empty of people. There is a quality to the air, a temperature, a stillness that tells you something was just there and is no longer. The cave system goes back further than our equipment could map in the time we had. I recommended in my official report that the site be marked restricted and that no further solo patrols operate in that grid sector. The recommendation was accepted without question. Nobody asked me why. Nobody wanted to know. The grid sector he marked restricted remained on coalition operational maps as a no-entry zone for 6 years. No official reason was ever recorded for the designation. In 2008, it was quietly removed. No explanation was filed for its removal either. There is a question I keep coming back to when I sit with this long enough. We talk a lot about what extreme combat does to human perception, how it distorts, how it amplifies, how it makes the brain produce meaning from noise and threat from shadow. That conversation is real. It is well documented. It matters. But here is the other side of that conversation, the side that gets discussed much less. Soldiers are trained observers. Their professional survival depends on the accuracy of their threat identification. They spend years learning to separate what is genuinely there from what the frightened mind wants to put there. When a soldier says he saw something, that testimony comes from a person whose entire training is built around the discipline of accurate perception under pressure. So here is the question I want to leave you with. A real one, not a rhetorical device, a genuine thing to sit with. If we accept that extreme stress degrades perception, and we also accept that military training is specifically designed to counteract that degradation, then what do we do with an account that comes from 12 separately debriefed, trained observers who independently produced the same specific details? Do we trust the stress, or do we trust the training? The mountains above Kandahar are still there. The cave systems are still there. The terrain that was marked restricted for 6 years and then quietly unrestricted with no explanation is still there. And whatever the officer meant when he wrote that it was not alone is still there too. Now I want to hear from you. Which of those 4 theories do you believe? Psychological, wildlife, enemy operations, or the oldest explanation of all, that the Pashtun communities who have lived in those mountains for centuries simply knew something that we did not? Drop it in the comments. Your theory, your reasoning, your questions. I read every single one. Let's actually talk about this. We set a goal of 10 likes at the start of this video. If we crossed it, that is you. That is your support telling me that this matters. If we have not crossed it yet, this is your moment. One tap. That is all. Next time, we go somewhere completely different. Different war, different continent, a different kind of darkness entirely, and a mystery that governments on 2 sides of a conflict both tried to erase. Which, if you think about it, might be the most interesting thing about it. If both sides wanted it gone, what does that tell you about what it was? Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you in the dark.